Hey everyone, what's going on? Sam here from the Next Web. I just want to give you all a very warm welcome to our last session of the evening during the Sprint Couch Conference. It's been great to have you all here, just joining this new concept that we've been trying. It's actually turned out to be really nice because we can have you from all over the world, no matter where you're based, learning some very insightful things. So before I introduce you to the wonderful speakers we have lined up for you today, I just want to go over 2 rules of thumb for you all to keep in mind when you're joining the session. The first thing first, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties while viewing the session, feel free to actually send us a direct message in the chat that's on the right side. Or you can also feel free to write us an email at conference@thenextweb.com. Again, that's conference@thenextweb.com. And we will reach out to you as soon as we can with a solution. And then the last thing I just want to mention is that if you have any sort of question to ask at any sort of point during the session, if you have any sort of comment to make, or if you'd like to respond to another participant, feel free to do so in the chat on the right-hand side. And if you would directly like to ask one of the speakers a question that you have, I would just ask if you can type at Q&A before the question. So in just a moment, I'm going to introduce Omer and Trish. So and essentially, if you could write at Q&A, hey Trish, blah, 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 that would be great, because what we will do at the end of this presentation is we're going to go through all of the questions that you asked, and it'll just be easier for the speaker to identify which questions were directed towards him or her, right? So excellent. So without further ado then, I'm going to stop talking. I just want to invite all of our speakers to turn on their screens. Let's see if everyone's here. Beautiful. I see Omer, Tom is here, Trish as well. How are we doing?
Great.
Excellent.
We are good. Thank you.
We are good. That's what I like to hear. Cool. 3 here. So just a quick introduction. Tom is the managing director of EMEA at Wrangle. Trish is the lead visual designer at Wrangle, and Omer is the solution architect at Wrangle. And during the session, they're essentially going to share how to build the best digital products and technology while getting developers and designers to better work together through applying the Dev-ineOps concept, which we're going to hear about in just a minute. So without further ado, take it away.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you for the introduction. So yeah, indeed, good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to Wrangle's second session of today, Dev-ineOps. Earlier today, we talked about the latest in technology in the future of front-end. And in Dev-ineOps, we want to share our experiences in operations, in design and development. Indeed, Trish and Omer will talk about a systemic approach to organize communication, collaboration, and co-creation for different problems, projects, and organizations. They have identified this by working together on various programs over time. So if over the course of the presentation you have any questions, I will be keeping an eye on those, and you can share them via chat using @Q&A. If we run out of time, or if you have something specific that you want to discuss, you can meet our stars behind the screens or behind the scenes at our booth, and you can find that at the Expo button. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Trish and Omer.
Thanks, Tom. So thanks everyone for joining us from your couch. Here I am from my couch. I felt it was only right. My name's Trish. I've been working in design and technology for over 10 years and been working at Wrangle for over 3. I'm a lead visual designer on projects and act as more of a design technologist, where I kind of bring together the 3 domains of business, design, and technology.
Hi, I'm Omer. I'm a solutions architect at Wrangle. I've been working at Wrangle for nearly 3 years, now about 15 years of experience in developing software. And it was at Wrangle where Trish and I were fortunate to be placed onto the same project, and we both agreed that there was a disconnect between how designers and developers work together.
Yeah, so me and Umer worked together on one of our first projects at Wrangle together over, let's say, 2 years ago. And our experience had always been at other companies, on other teams, seeing that there was a big disjointed workflow between design and development. And if you aren't purposeful about the way these teams are going to work, is always naturally going to be the way that they start to execute. And I think that's for a very specific reason, because design was never taught to be agile. You can't really tell design to be agile and just walk away and hope that they're going to figure it out in tandem with development. And then also taking even a step further back, if we're going to take a look at like how design is taught, even at the graphic design level as well, we're taught that when you send your work off to production, that you're done. You don't really get a second chance to make it better. So it's an innate way to designers, how designers work, to want to be very perfect before they hand off any of their artifacts to production, and in this case, development.
And so like Trish said, that Agile was never really designed for designers, but it was designed for developers. And it's completely like a flipped process for us, to where we have a system and tooling that allows us to move quickly. We can make changes. There's no penalty for mistakes. You don't really expect something to be completely done. You're always working on the system. But what we felt was that between dev and designs, there was a sort of like disconnect, because it felt that there was this handoff. It wasn't like a seamless interaction. It felt like we were working between two different teams, but yet we're still building the same product. And for us to understand like why that was, we had to understand the system that we were using at the time.
Right. So you have these two domains that have these completely like innate ways of working, and which you could call a system. And so I've always really appreciated this quote from Donella Meadows that goes, "Stop looking for who's to blame. Instead, start asking, what is the system? If you want to understand the deepest malfunctions of systems, pay attention to the rules." So if we know that, and we start to think about operations as just another type of system, we can start to think about what kind of outcomes we want to see emerge from the system. And then once we do that, we can start to work backwards and figure out what we want to implement.
So at Wrangle, we have these expectations for how a team should function. So that helped Trish and I understand the destination, but we had to figure out like how we're going to get there. And so for us to be cross-functional, an example would be developer onboarding. So that's normally, we have documentation, tools, guides on how to set up and build a code base. But if we wanted to change that to make it cross-functional, we're going to change that from developer onboarding to team member onboarding, to where everybody should have access to the repository, everybody should have an account, everybody should have Git. They should understand how to check out a branch, run the branch, run it on a device. So that's just like one example of us being able to, from the developer perspective, being able to pull the designers closer to us, to where there's nothing that's developer-centric. It's now accessible to the whole team. And we also needed the team to run smoothly so that we knew how much work we could get done each sprint. And what that meant was that everybody really needed to understand what was going on with the project, and we really needed to understand the product we're building, so that we don't have these huge surprises come along that would derail what we thought was a predictable outcome. And part of that also is making sure that we're in between individuals or teams, because it doesn't really make sense if you want your team to move fast. It's just much more efficient if the team can then swarm together and solve issues as they come up, so that we can just keep on delivering. So once we understood the outcomes that we wanted, we had to focus on the rules that we had to change or destroy.
Right. So if you take a quick Google search on, really casually, how design and development is supposed to work together, you're going to see these three words: communication, collaboration, and co-creation. And we could call these for our system the rules. But how the rules work is going to be very different for everybody on how they interpret these like really big, broad words. And if you don't define them, they really turn into like ambiguous cliches that don't carry any meaning and don't enact any change and don't enact any outcomes that you want to see. But the size of the problem you're solving, the meaning of these words and how you would operationalize them is going to be very different. So at Wrangle, we service many different types of problems, many different sizes of problems, from small POCs to like enterprise level solutions, and the operations on these sizes of teams would look very, very different. So if we're going to think about maybe like a small size problem, just a quick profile of a small size problem, let's say ongoing content improvements to an existing website. Now, if a CMS already exists and a design system already exists, and really what the team is just doing is continuously making their stories better, making their content better, it's more of a marketing problem, then your team's probably going to be very small. It's going to be under 5 people, and your approach is going to be a swarm model where everybody on the team is coming together to solve different parts of the problem at the same time. There's no real formal process just because everyone's so tightly aligned. So a medium-sized problem is actually more the focus of what we're going to talk about today, and this is the size problem me and Umer solved, where it was an unmet need in a market for an app that was going to connect to a medical device from your phone. And our team at its biggest was about 14 people, which kind of, just because of the size, there was more of a clear delineation of work. So you had a core track that was more technology focused of the developers and quality assurance. And then there was an enablement track that was more delivery, product, and design. And we would come together to semi-swarm problems where we come together and we talk and figure out the best plan of attack and the best approach, and then separate to start solving problems and creating artifacts in more of a tiered model, which I'll unpack in a minute. And then you got larger size problems where if you're, for example, building a design system from the ground up, and you have a team of up to 20 people and over, then you start to having to like carve the work down into divisible tracks and divisions of work. So for a design system, one example would be like you have the documentation site team that's focusing on solving that problem. You have a component team that's focused on deriving components, and then you have an enablement team that's more focused on unblocking the other 2 teams, which is more composed of leadership. But for the purposes of today, we're just going to talk about the medium-sized team, and this is the example that me and Uber worked on together. So let's talk about how we communicate. So when we talk about how to communicate, we're not talking about Slack or email or the tools you use to communicate. We're talking about how you approach problems, because if you define how you approach problems, this will really influence how you communicate about decisions, distribute information, and solve problems between disciplines, which are very important. So like we said in these like sizing examples, for smaller teams, you get more of a purist swarmed approach where they can stay very in line, and the staggering flow of their artifacts is in line, and they're really close together and very informal actually with how they solve problems. But at larger size scale, you have this tiered approach where the flow of artifacts is going to be staggered because there's just so much work that needs to be done. But to deep dive into more of the medium-sized team, which is exactly what me and Umer used, we used a semi-swarmed problem-solving approach. And what this chart is supposed to tell you here is just to show that there was actually like time in between the flow of our artifacts. There was a week in between where we would come together and solve problems and execute those problems in whatever our specialty was. So I'm going to unpack this a little bit more in the next slide, where we talk about how to collaborate. So when we say collaborate, we mean more, what are your rituals? And these are very important because they are meetings or touch points or norms that are dedicated to enabling collaboration that get systemized. Like they become placeholder calendar events that repeat every week, so you no longer have to really think about them. And this is kind of what we mean about this systemized operationalization. So some of these rituals could look like weekly internal team meeting reviews, weekly product owner gut checks, ceremonies and demos, and the flow of design tickets into development tickets on Jira. So this is where things get really interesting. if we imagine that this is a representation of like a Jira board, and like you have the top labels on the top here, and these are swim lanes on Jira. If design were to take a ticket from to do to in progress from the beginning of the week, and more like in the middle of the week, let's say Wednesday is our first weekly internal team review. And it's where design, and in this case myself, was taking very half-baked work, but enough that I have had a chance to form an opinion of what I think should happen, so that I can take it to the table and discuss with everybody, the entire Scrum team, about what I think should happen to solve this problem. And then that gives the tech team and delivery and everyone that's at a table a chance to contribute to the solution and feel like they're a part of the solution and start speaking the same language of the solution before it goes into the weekly product owner touch point, gut check, where once the team is aligned internally on the language and the solutioning, then we're now talking to our product owner and getting their input as well, so they feel like they're a part of the solutioning. And another big bonus of these touch points is it starts to bring up some dependencies further down the line as you're talking things through. And in the example of our context of this POC for a medical device, we were able to figure out way early on that privacy and security was going to be a really big concern, especially because the market we were going to be launching in was Europe, and GDPR was coming really fast at the time. It hadn't started just yet, but it was coming, and we knew that we needed to be set up and enabled for success with that. And that's just in a week. And so by the time the end of the week and the design ticket's done, it moves on to ceremonies and demo. And that's a place where the entire team has a chance to kind of review something that's already been very well socialized. And there's really no surprises here. Everyone expects what's being presented, and they're in agreement that this is the direction we should be going in.
And so what I want to speak to is like how this really helped me from the technical development perspective. So if we look at like week one, where Trish would have the dev code review and we do just an internal team review, specifically on this project that we had, we were dealing with a medical device. So if designs were coming through and I saw that there was potential for us to add additional functionality because we understood like what kind of data we could get in real time, we could inform Trish at that point. And the opposite would be if we saw designs that may require a lot more algorithms or calculations to be created, and we've said, hey, Trish, this is gonna be like a lot harder than we would think. We could tell her at that point. And so she was informed on the capabilities of the system at the time, what was easy and what was hard. But then when we go into week two, this is where I said earlier that like Agile is like extremely well suited for development. And that's where we're trying to bring Trish into our process. Now, all we had to do was just add a design review process. And that is basically exactly like code review, where we would put it up on GitLab. She could check out the branch, run it on the native device, and give us feedback. And we had that actually happen before the dev code review, because we understood that if she's going to give us feedback on UX or UI, that's going to require code changes. So what would be the point of showing that to developers first if the code's going to change anyway? And since this is within GitLab, all we had to really do was just add additional fields on Jira, and we would be able to make sure that we were getting the UI, the UX, and the code correct for a ticket. The other thing which I really liked about this process was now we have pulled Trish into our process. So her work is on the Jira board, and the whole team can see what the whole team is doing. If I wanted to look, I could see what she was working on right now and begin to anticipate the work that she was going to be creating. And so when an example would be like, I'd go home and I start planning, like, how am I going to be working on this feature in like the next few weeks of what I just saw her do. And we had our feedback loops were tight. We also saw that we didn't really have, if much at all, any rework, where once something was done, it was correct, it was accurate. We had QA, code, design, UI, UX, everything was good. And so this really solved what I thought was like an initial problem with Agile design, to where like a lot of Agile work isn't reflected on the Jira board. And it seems to be the strange thing of like, design is done, and then we create these development tickets, to where now we've brought her into our process, and it worked out really great.
Right. So like I said, this is just a snapshot for what a cycle would look like for a medium-sized team. You would want to redesign this for your different size teams and your different contexts as well. So if we're going to move on to the next section about how to co-create, this is more of a question about how does your work flow. This is kind of like the culminating task of pulling everything together, of communication and collaboration. It shows exactly, so now that we're communicating about how to approach problems, we have our collaboration model with how we have rituals to communicate and socialize. Now it's a question of the artifacts themselves. And some of those questions about co-creation could look a little bit like, what does the team need to provide each other with today so that they can anticipate tomorrow? What kind of artifacts can be parallelized? And how does continuous improvement continue to happen over time? So this is a bit of a dense chart, but this is roughly kind of the artifact flow that we had for our project. And I just want to be clear too that at the beginning of our project, we didn't go away and like design these little charts and then present them back to the team and socialize it. The goal was always the communication. It was never the artifact creation itself. So, we could verbally talk and agree in a room with how we wanted to work without having to produce these like really robust graphics on exactly what that looked like. We just continued to talk. We had these rituals. We were always in step with each other because we were continuing to always communicate. So with the artifact flow, just to give you like a snapshot of example, there's a gap here where in the beginning of the project, there's some time for the enablement track, the design and delivery and product team to start to identify high-level user journeys on a whiteboard and like socialize what the requirements are of this project, and work with development on that as well, just to give them the heads up of what to anticipate, like what this project's going to be about. But during this, they're in this like little gray area here. They're setting up their environments. They're starting to come up with their own norms and ways of working and how they want to maintain their DevOps, while design and product start to think about turning those high-level user journeys into low-fidelity wireframes for like key flows and happy paths. So these are very high-level. These are black and white wireframes. And then by the time that development is ready to start absorbing those, they're absorbing them in a way where they're just proving out their functionality. Like they're literally developing wireframes because for something like a POC that had such robust like technology that needed to be proven that you could even connect to a medical device, let alone have it work well or look good, we needed to prove that it worked at all. So this gave development a chance to start proving that process out, that yes, you can communicate with the medical device. Yes, you can start doing some basic calculations and things like that. And while they're doing that, I'm moving ahead and starting to identify more fuller looks at the user flows for edge cases and unhappy paths, so that by the time development is ready to start really flushing out the entirety of the user journey, we've also been already doing this thinking together, where I'm coming to them during our rituals and showing them what I'm thinking about, even though it's a week out for them to start working on. But they're completely aligned with where my head's at and what's the context of the entire project. And so once I start thinking about that, then I continue to move ahead and start applying high fidelity visual design to key screens and components. I start identifying major building blocks for the UI and start to replicate that across the app itself, and can componentize the front end and identify some foundational style elements, so that when the entire team starts moving into this like continuous improvement cycle, we have components to refer to, and we can continue to move things around in a system within a system, a systemized way, to make sure that we're continuously improving quickly and fluidly. So this kind of moves us on to the outcomes. I've really been holding this really interesting opinion lately that I think the next frontier for technology and innovation is really going to be an emotional and behavioral one. And we're kind of seeing this in the world too, where we need to find a way to be more patient and calm and open to learning through the experiences of others. And when that happens, great things start to emerge, like innovation makes a jump to light speed. And so let's take a look at some of the outcomes of working this way.
So we explained earlier, we knew the outcomes that we wanted to have, and we had to figure out how to get there. And by changing the rules of the system, we enabled us to accomplish and reach those outcomes. But what also happened was that we started to see other outcomes that I felt were sort of unexpected. And these are positive outcomes. And so what we wanted was to bridge the gap between design and development. And so Trish could run the app locally on any branch, or anybody on the team could run the app on locally on a device. And also because development was so tight with how Trish operated, we started to think really well in terms of UX and UI and provide her feedback. So where we saw that there's something that we didn't really understand or felt confusing or we thought we could be better, we knew how to communicate in a way that she understood and could apply that in the work that she was doing. But since we also had to reach these outcomes, we had to break down barriers between the different roles in the teams. We started to become very well cross-functional. And we became so cross-functional on our team that everybody understood at a point how to get prepared for ceremonies, how to create the sprint deck. We knew how to write the tickets, do render refinement. We knew how to, anybody could just run stand up and unblock, and we'd look at the Jira board. And we reached a point where we didn't need to have a delivery manager on the team because we were just functioning as basically as a single delivery team, and we all knew what we needed to do. Also, because we knew so much about the project and the product, and we weren't getting blocked, and everybody understood everything, we were very good at predicting how much we could deliver in a sprint. And so if we looked at a roadmap, what would be coming up, we could give accurate predictions of where we would be. And we didn't have a lot of surprises in that, we couldn't accomplish what we thought. We were hitting things, and we were moving fast, and we reached a point to where we became hungrier for harder and harder problems because we could just take that harder problem and deliver on it. And a benefit of that was that since we broke down these sort of communication barriers between the different roles on the team, and we were delivering correctly, we saw that our PO feedback started to become smaller and smaller because once they looked at something, it was basically what they wanted. But internally, we saw that our retros were always very, I would say, vast or vocal. Everybody knew that if there was an issue, we needed to address it, and they weren't afraid of it. And we also enabled people that they didn't have to look for someone to fix the issue. We just fixed the issue as we saw it. We swarmed together as a team, fixed it, and then would move on. What was great about this system that we created was morale was super high on the team because we're just constantly delivering. We weren't frustrated. Everybody was eager. We were just focused on shipping. And I reflect a lot and think about this to where initially Trish and I just wanted to fix the developer and design relationship. But in doing so, we created a much stronger system for the team to function.
So these are all great. This, as Uber said, the outcomes were really great and empowering for us. And these models were really useful for us and our specific context. But ultimately, you're going to need to experiment and find what works for you. Operations are something that needs purposeful design, much like anything. You need to actually think about them and think about what you want. And be skeptical towards yourself and ask what it is you want to see and constantly reevaluate if your approach and your rituals and your process is enabling the outcomes you do want to see. And then by learning and asking and working with others and learning about their experience of working in that system and bringing together their diversity of perspective, we'll be able to understand if the system's working and if it's bringing out the outcomes that we want. And so on that note, we wish you good luck, and happy to talk to you about some of the problems you're having after in the expo section. But thank you so much for joining us for the end of this wonderful session, and thanks to TWG to having us as well.
Yeah, actually, we do have some time left for a couple of questions, if you're ready for it, of course. So there have been quite a number of questions, also some debate about the greatness or not so greatness of Jira. If I look at the questions that Alejandro Esteve as well as Liz Lawson put forward, they're pretty much around tools, and I will try to combine them into one very complicated question probably. So Alejandro asked what support tools we use to support a system for a mid-sized team, and Liz is interested to understand what tools we use to enable communications and enable updates in an agile workplace. More specifically, how does GitLab work keeping the latest design version clear across teams?
So I'll answer the part about like the tools in GitLab. So for GitLab was used for code. And so that's where we were putting our code. And that wasn't where Trish was necessarily putting her designs. And I would say part of the tools is like, those are tools that are dictated to us by the client because we were using their GitLab instance. But like Trish said, like the tooling needs to be something that the team agrees on if they have a choice to select, like Jira, GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. Those aren't particular. If those are the restrictions, then the team should figure out how they would want to work around that. Trish?
Yeah, well, so from the design perspective, this is an interesting question because what we used at that time is actually very different than what I would recommend now. At that time, I was on Sketch, and I was using Abstract to control my branches and my versioning, and I was pushing all my work to InVision for the team to absorb and have a source of truth for. So right now, actually, my workflow has actually gotten much quicker and much more transparent because we've started to move as an organization more towards Figma. And if you don't know much about Figma, it works very similar to Google Docs. So you can actually watch me work while I design. It's a wonderful channel on TV to watch these days. So the source of truth is always up to date. And so there's a slightly different process in terms of how I organize my Figma files to communicate with developers as like these comps are dev ready and these are in progress. But in terms of like other tools like Jira and other communication tools, we also use Notion. We really love Notion at Wrangle, a little bit more than Confluence. Because it's really user friendly and its editing capabilities is really great, and I can keep links and knowledge all centralized there, especially if I have like documentation in Google Drive for, let's say, slide decks or documents like Word documents or spreadsheets. I will use Notion to centralize like the linking of all of that to spell out like where to find things. So those are some of the.
I was going to say that one of the things that we did for communication, which has nothing to do with technology, was that we made sure Trish sat with the developers. Like her desk was right next to developers, so we could just turn around or just ask her, like, "What are you doing?" or "What is going on?" I think pre-COVID, like being like near people that you need to communicate with helped a lot. And also our team was entirely based off of the Toronto office. So everybody was in the room when we needed to talk about something. So Slack and these kind of toolings weren't immediately like as important then. But we also do use Slack for chat. It's a combination of tools that are used, but I wouldn't necessarily say like, it just depends on the team. You can't say like this one is the golden rule for collaboration.
I will also say too, as one small like behavioral difference on our team was that all of our conversations happened in public channels.
So yeah.
Like during during this project, there was pretty much no direct messages because we wanted everyone to see what we were talking about. There was no reason to exclude anyone from what we were talking about. So even though we had like a design channel and a dev channel, we were both a part of both of them. And all conversations were very public.
That was something we created in team norms, that there had to be transparency and communication. So if we were doing it like on Jira or GitLab or Slack, everybody should have access to see that.
All right, I hope that answers that question, or those questions rather. Maybe let's go a little bit more behavioral, since we're moving in that direction anyhow. And Deborah Rogers asked the question, how you deal with those typical anti-collaborators and anti-communicators in your team or in your systems?
Oh man, that is such a wonderful question. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about. As like I said, I really do believe the next frontier is behavioral and emotional. I've written about this, about how to demonstrate vulnerability. And the answer is you show them by behavioral modeling, by going into rooms and demonstrating the behavior you want to see on your teams. If someone's being very anti-collaborative, you show them what it looks like to be collaborative, where you're always asking them questions and wanting to understand and being very open, vulnerable, and transparent with exactly what you don't know. Because ultimately, like, function on teams is the team's ability to deal with reality on reality's terms. And if the further away you get from dealing with reality and more dealing in abstract political spheres and weird mental models that don't represent anything that have to do with what's actually happening, that's where dysfunction happens. So my personal take on that is you show teams through your own behavior how to be transparent, how to be vulnerable, how to say I don't know, and stuff like that.
I would add also to where it's worth trying to understand like where that behavior comes from, if there's like anti-collaboration. We can't just take it at face value and be like, well, they don't want to collaborate. It's trying to understand the people that you're working with and see what it is and what can be done to like bring them into the team. So our team was about 14 people. Every person's very different, but we were able to get at the largest team size, 14 people to collaborate. And you can correct me, Trish, but I don't really remember there being a great struggle. I think we had created a culture to where it was easy for us to bring in, even if there's a new team member, have them feel comfortable, and they would just see how we operated.
Yeah, it was like, don't get me wrong, we definitely had moments and challenges where, like, you know, some team members, newer team members that would roll onto the project that would kind of, you know, demonstrate some more antiquated behavioral models of you know, ego and fear, even being afraid that they're going to look stupid. And the team would kind of like set the tone and kind of set that safety, that psychological safety, that it's okay. Like, you don't have to know. We all don't know. No one knows. That's why we're doing this. It's never been done before, or else it would already exist.
Yeah, and I think a part of that was our team culture was we didn't really have sort of like a hierarchy. Everybody felt very like kind of like flat, to where we're all equals participating on a project. So it's not like I'm telling you. It's that this is established how the team operates, and so people didn't necessarily feel. I'd say they wouldn't feel threatened being on the team. We encouraged people to challenge what we would think.
Okay, well, more importantly, just wanted to share a shout out for your awesome t-shirt, Trish. So there you have it.
Oh my God, the best show ever in the history of everything. If you haven't seen the show Atlanta by Donald Glover, I highly suggest it. And now is a good time to say Black Lives Matter and Black Art Matters. So go watch it.
All right. Well, we still have a little bit more time for another question. Catherine Sokour wants to know if we work in the same sprint or synchronized but separate sprints.
Sorry, repeat that again. Say that one more time.
Do we work in the same sprint or synchronized but separate sprints, or does it depend?
Yeah,
this
so
one, Boomer?
if I understand the question correctly, we would be in the same sprint within the tooling. It would just be, Trish would be doing work that was going to be a week ahead of when I would pick it up. So it's the same, say, sprint 2.5 or whatever. She has her tickets for 2.5, which would be for me to consume at 2.6. And I'm been working on 2.5, where she had done designs in 2.4. It would be same sprint, same field. We would just see it as a whole team. What the whole team is working on at a moment in time. It would just be that her delivery is like a cycle ahead of what we needed because of just how our team was operating at that point. Right, Trish? Yeah.
I'm glad you got more into the technicalities of it. But yeah, we were working in the same sprints.
Because that was the easiest thing for us to do. We didn't feel it making it more complicated in any way would benefit us. And also, if a request would come in from the PO, we were the type of team that would challenge it because we knew how we operated and what made us efficient. And so that was also another thing of we knew what was good for us. Right, Trish? Yeah, we were very vocal about communicating like how we wanted to function.
Oh yeah, and like, I mean, communicating is hard, especially when you have to communicate something that you think someone else is wrong, or have to engage them in like a critical thinking discussion where, you know, you want to approach that delicately because it's not an attack. Mm-hmm. It's a discussion about something objective. And essentially what we're doing is science, right? And we can prove whether or not theories are true. And it's not a personal representation of who you are or your skills. Like you are trying to find out something, and the closer you can stay to maintaining your ability of saying I don't know, the better you'll get real quick.
And I felt that we understood that we had created or discovered the system that worked very well for the team, and we didn't really want to like break that system completely for the sake of generating, you know, very specific metrics or something like that. Like once we had that system working, we would tweak it, but we tweak it to make us stronger.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Aaron Wang, I hope that also answers some of the questions that you had. Yeah, we're already or almost reaching our time, but I do want to ask one last question because I don't think we can hide from this. Andre Lindo asks if COVID-19 has changed the way our processes work.
So I'll explain my opinion on this is not at all, if really, because you know those rituals are still, they're meetings, like we're still talking and they're still happening. The thing that really sucks is you know, not getting to hang out with my buddy Umer at lunch and talk about the PlayStation games we're playing and the comics we're reading, and that sucks. But you know, we use the phone a lot more now. I like calling Umer on Slack calling, and just call him and say, what's up? How's it going?
Yeah, and just to add to that point, a lot of it just moved to become more digital. What would change is like a lot of the tooling or processes didn't necessarily change. It's just more of this sort of informal communication of me just walking over to Trisha's desk and be like, what are you doing right now? Just show me. Right? To where like I don't really have the way to like bring up her laptop and just start like peering over her shoulder and be like, why are you making that a circle, not a square? Which I used to just like ask those kind of things. It's different, and it's an adjustment. And I feel like there are probably a lot of learnings from this to where when we eventually do go back, I don't think it really changes our whole process or system too much. It's just more of I think the bonding changed a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
I almost hate to cut in and cut this short because there's such great insights and great energy being shared that I'm like, oh, I have to be the bearer of bad news. But I just want to, thank all three of you again for being in this session, for sharing your expertise. Also, I can really see the audience definitely enjoyed it, and also to everyone who is watching, thank you so much for asking those questions and participating and getting this conversation going. It's always really nice to see. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, TNW. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please come and see us at our booth. We'll be hanging out there for more questions if you have.
Exactly. So just like Tom said, that's where Rango will be hanging out. So if you just look on the left-hand side again, you'll see that Expo section where you can click on, and then from there you can see where their virtual booth is located to click on that and ask them any other outstanding questions you may have. Otherwise, feel free to try out our networking feature if you haven't already. There's some great content also going on in the main stage. So yeah, thank you so much again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Ciao, ciao.